This is the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. The purpose of this video is to discuss the nature and relationship of God, Jesus Christ, you, me, and anyone else, and our relationships. The problem comes up with two main areas of projection. First of all, projection humanity onto God, like an intelligent being up in the sky somewhere. Well, God with the capital G is everything. It's not just God is everywhere, God is everything. Eternal and infinite, matter, space, and motion, not created and not destroyed. The true physics will be built on these postulates. But out of this material substance, evolution creates large galactic structures that are attracted to one another, and the mechanism is understood. It's a shadow effect. But so there's then a collapse and a melting down, as it were, of all the larger structures built. It's just like actually when you burn a house, you're not destroying any matter. You're destroying the structure made out of the matter. And the matter is going off as gas, liquid, and dust in the chemical elements. In the nature of the galactic formation and destruction, it's even stronger than that. The atoms get destroyed and broken into their more fundamental parts. And the bottom of it is the ether, and the basic building blocks are vortex rings, like smoke rings. But that's another level. That's God's nature, and the laws, which are eternal, don't change. Infinite and eternal. Hard for us to think about because everything we know has a set distance and exists for a certain amount of time. I'm 78. I'm going to die for another probably 20 years. I hope to live long enough and have my brain, enough of it, work to finish something on the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. But what brings up this discussion, I'm working on the website, on the foundation part, and the discussion having what the Arianism, just a name. The people have been murdered because they were called Aryans. And I'm an Arian. Different. It's a belief system that if you're an Arian, there are things like the present Catholic Church. It wasn't that way all the time. Arianism was part of the Catholic Church at various periods, but then an ecumenical council declared it a heresy, and it gets its name after a bishop, Arius. But what we need a little background before we say whether you're Arian or not Arian. What does it mean? Well, what do you believe? Here's God, and all things formed out of God's material substance. Everything is part of God. Just like the clay, whatever you make out of it is part of the clay, and you break it up and it's gone, but the particles of clay are still there, unless you're talking about some thermonuclear destruction of atomic matter. So at any rate, God is everything. And we are made out of God's substance. Evolution is a process of creating and destroying, not something out of nothing, but like creating a hat and then cutting it up and using the material for something else. Or a piece of clay and form a figure out of it and then make another ball and make a different figure out of it. Creation and destruction of the form, not of the substance. All right, so here's this eternal God, which all things are made out of God and are in that sense part of God. Just like you have clay and you take a little piece of it and make a little figure, it's part of the clay. So then comes humankind, that they can learn these laws. And on the earlier level of intelligence of pre-human mammals, there are many examples of behavior that are genetic. The birds have a structure without arms and hands. The male bird can't rape to make the female. So one of the basic laws of genetics is what makes the babies makes the genetics. And so with the birds, what gets the female's attention is a nice boy. And they don't have the hands to grab and rape, so they please the female to get her attention. And when she has the what would amount to being in heat, for I don't know the correct word for birds, for mammals, it's the cycle where the egg can be fertilized, and chooses a male to mate with. And there's some wonderful examples, like many of the doves that mate, some just for the season to work together to care for the nest, the young, and others mate for life. They pair and care about one another. But with mammals, the ability to grab onto with the legs, like a dog grabs a female dog or a cat, another female cat, or the same thing with the squirrels. There's a history of forcible. The male is attracted to the female that's in heat and rapes her. And there's a genetic behavior associated with that, a resentment for the rape. And also the males beat up the other males. So there's a resentment of the males against other males. And the beauty of mammalian, like you can study horses, they study how weaning, premature weaning harms the behavior of the horses, and it's a no-brainer. They're willing to keep the information and publish it scientifically. It's the same thing with humans, but they won't publish it. It's the maternal nursing bond, and with humans, the baby knows its mother at birth because from the sounds it had during the womb, and it's attracted. Many mothers raised in daycare don't know how to be a mother. The same thing with a cat. You take a kitten away from its mother too soon. When it grows up, it doesn't know how to be a mother. So the problem with caring for your own species, with this male domination of other males and females in the mammals, there is a genetic resentment for the dominant male. And it shows up in a very strange way. The great apes, cats, and dogs don't associate the baby with the rape. The great apes often nurse their young until the second molars, the age of 5 or 6 years equivalent in human terms. Human beings don't. Why? What happened to human beings that the maternal nursing bond and the willingness to carry this little baby and give it the attention that it needs, even to 5 or 6 years old? Why is it missing in human beings? And it's quite simple. The great apes, as Africa developed a grassland called a savanna, they got out of the trees and learned to walk and talk and run. And in the process of logical communications, the ability from one generation to tell the other, the baby came from the man. That association doesn't exist in the lower order animals. They don't have logic to say that, and the time separation separates the birth from the rape. But humans have developed logical speech and transmitted that awareness of the child coming from the rape to the point that genetically, the genetic resentment of the male is associated with the product of the rape, the child. Infanticide, maternal infanticide, the mother killing its baby, is a human phenomenon, very rarely in any other animals. But it's been common ever since human history. Throw them off the cliff, throw them in the river, leave them out in the woods for the animals to eat. In Pakistan, where they don't allow abortion, one of the largest human not-for-profit organizations is one that goes around picking up dead babies out of the garbage, because they're not allowed to get abortion, but they just let the baby be born and kill it, put it in the garbage. This is nothing new, and that's where a lot of old mysticism came from. We'll sacrifice this child to God, to a god, and they would make idols and sacrifice to it. Moloch was had arms, was a statue like this with arms out, and they'd build a fire, and the women would come and put their babies in the arms, and they'd tumble into the fire while the priests played the drums so loud that they couldn't hear the baby crying. It's even said that Abraham's father made idols that the women would sacrifice to. But along in this historical background, the mammoth hunters with 3 tons of meat learned to make big boats. So you can find the mammoth bone homes around the Black Sea, but they came from up the Don River and other rivers. That was what you can find evidence of the Europeans hunting mammoths in America. And but they had to work together. That had a big effect on that culture, the European culture. And they had to make big boats. It was too much to carry. They'd take it. The mammoths ate by the water. They'd kill them by the water. They'd load the meat in the bones and boats and carry them 1,000 miles down the river. And during that time, they could observe the stars, and they did learn ocean sailing. There's evidence all around Africa and India and over into Korea, where they set up these big megaliths as they sailed along the shore. And this is where a lot of pre-religious things come from. Because as they sailed, and they sailed near around India, and India had this caste system where the Europeans had invaded and made themselves the upper caste of priests and warriors. And here they are asking, well, how do you sail? How do you sail? Here's this priesthood class. How do you sail? And they tell them, well, we understand the stars. With all the time they spent sailing to get these mammoths and take them home, and somebody had to stay up at night, and they learned that how to look at the stars and tell where they were, latitude and longitude, by the stars and the time of night. And all you had to do was have a drip clock to know the middle of the night and what's overhead to tell you where you're at. And they could sail on the ocean even. So they told him, we sail by the stars. The priesthood made themselves magicians. We'll tell your fortune by the stars. They can tell you the future. And all this worship. And then the discovering amongst these stars that they can sail by, which are the priestly class in India taught them that they can tell their fortune by the stars. Here's some stars moving among the other stars. Wow, they must be powerful. The others are powerful enough to tell you where you're at. And here's some moving. The god of war, Mars, the god of beauty, Venus, and so forth. The Roman and Greek gods were the planets. But so here's all this worship and building idols and everything, and sacrificing humans to them. And along comes Abraham, and he's going to kill his son to sacrifice to God. But he sets an example. He says, God told me don't do it, and he gave me a goat or a sheep or something. Don't sacrifice your children, sacrifice animals. And that's what set aside a special people. And he said, he understood another thing, this worshiping of planets and worshiping of idols. The most strongest point in the sky, the North Pole, where everything went around the North Pole, it was empty. The Most High unseen God is the most powerful God. Don't make any images of it. So they worship this Most High unseen God and set aside a special people that don't sacrifice their children. That was the source of the Hebrews, the Jewish. A special people of God. What made them special was they didn't sacrifice their babies. And then they ended up going to Africa, to Egypt for food, and became indentured servants. They had their own homes and everything. They called it slavery. They didn't have the freedom, but they had their food and they had their homes. But then along comes Moses, and these stories about the Pharaoh could have all the children killed if he wanted of them. He could order anything he wanted for the indentured servants, as the Jewish slaves. But along comes Moses to lead them out of this. And Moses had a special revelation of commandments that even Pharaoh was responsible for, and had the death penalty. He had no right to murder. And here's the 10 commandments. Don't lie, don't steal, don't murder. And if you do, you're responsible. And you're to be held responsible according to the law. That made another very special people. Not just don't kill your babies, but everybody's responsible for respecting innocent life and not lying and not stealing. Be honest with your neighbor. Not too hard to think is nice. At any rate, here's and Moses with his helpers established a priesthood to teach the people these laws and developed a written language to write them down. The things in the Torah, the Old Testament, Bruno Bettelheim, a Jew that survived the Nazi Holocaust and became a professor at the University of California. He had a home for autistic children and wrote many books. Ended up being ostracized by the Jews and his own daughters, from what I heard. I did have a chance to speak to him. When he retired, he spoke at the University of Buffalo, and I asked him, "Are you Jewish?" And he says, "Well, I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious." He says, "I do respect the Jewish books," because he had studied many things with a good depth, like the kibbutzim. And his rejection by the Jewish was because he wrote the foreword. Another survivor of the Holocaust wrote a book on the Holocaust and asked him to write the foreword, and he did. And in the foreword, he said the Jews were in a large part responsible for their own demise. They were too materialistic, attracted to their wealth, and would not leave because they were told. And his family had owned a lumber business in Austria, and the Jews were warned, "We want you out, or we're gonna take over." And he sold his property and was leaving when he was arrested. Then they let him go for one of the major Nazi birthdays. They freed some, and that was in 1939. But because he said that about the Jews, many ostracized him, wrote many bad things about him when he died. At any rate, where was I? With Abraham or Moses and the laws and the Torah, the old Jewish text. And when he studied those the before written language, these were storytelling cultures around the Mediterranean and over across to Babylon. They were storytelling cultures. They didn't have a written language. Like Muhammad, people basically didn't have a written language. They were a storytelling culture, and that's not ignorant people. They're communicating face to face is actually more intelligent than reading a book. You're communicating directly, and there's more to it than just reading the words. They're sharing experience in a different way. The storytelling cultures, and a proof of that is the Roma or Gypsy culture. 1,000 years ago, escaped from the Muslim invasions of India. They were upper class, warrior class, and they had been forced out of their land fighting, and then finally took their wagons and drifted off to a safe Christian area where they could just go along getting jobs picking fruit and picking off the ground whatever they needed. But they didn't have a written language, and they kept the culture for 1,000 years. At night they would put their wagons together, and the elders would tell the stories. Without a written language, they kept a healthy culture for 1,000 years. And then they become literate in the modern age, and it destroyed their culture. Now they're out there living in the cities and begging everywhere. And when I get off the plane here in Russia, they're out there and they're at the market here, and they're out knocking on the door here. They used to be at my grandma's back door once a year when they'd come through with their wagons in Pennsylvania. But that's another story. the storytelling cultures had these, and it was the elders that told the stories. They were cared about their children and grandchildren. They didn't talk nonsense like the children's comics and videos of today. They talked stories like about the jealous brother, Cain killed Abel, and things like this that would have a message that would help the culture, the growing of their children and grandchildren. So that's the foundation there. But they set up a priesthood to teachers and government. Basically, that was the government. Then 10% was the taxes, what you had to pay for the government, which was also the educators. And the priests then, as human nature is, they made themselves the alpha male dominating, and they had the submissive females and they had the submissive males, and they had the rules and the authority. You have to come to us and we'll go to God. The Holy of Holies had entered once a year for you, but you had to bring all your sacrifices to them. And here comes Jesus and says, no, I'm part of God. God is my Father. God is my source of existence. And I'm from him to tell you you can communicate directly with him. And I'm willing to die saying the truth rather than serving a priesthood. And the priests resented this, and they got the Romans to kill him. And then they punished those who followed him. And before you know it, you can read where you have some elders, there were home churches then, and you have some elders that wouldn't let the 2x2 apostles that Jesus prayed for, that would give up everything to go carry out the gospel, wouldn't let them in the meeting. They made themselves the bishop. A bishop is the name, or elder was the person man whose home the meeting was in. And they made themselves the authority figures, the priests, and they wouldn't allow these missionaries to come as if they had authority. Not that they needed to come with authority, but there was conflict normally. Look, read about the conflicts between Paul and his companions and Peter and his companions, and Peter was telling them that or respecting the Jewish rituals of can't eat certain things and all of these problems that they had. And here Jesus sent them out 2x2. They went with their wives or sisters, and Paul said, we can do that too. But of course, then they have the priesthood. Some of them decide you can't have married couples, and then in the modern times, two women can go 2x2. But it doesn't make any difference. The Bible says not to suffer women to teach and have authority over men. That's not a sexist thing. It has to do with the way the human brain is constructed for logical behavior and the leadership in both times of peace and war, of difficulty, stress and no stress. It needs to be the logical control, because we have this animal nature of hatred for the alpha male that has corrupted humankind, where our animalness is degraded to the point where the women don't even care for their babies half the time. How many rapes, how many infants are killed in the womb and after the womb? It's a catastrophe and such an evil. But we're degraded from the dog mothers, and the ape mothers don't do that. But humans are degraded because they have had logical speech and associated the resentment of the rape with the product of the rape. And that's the way that is. So now that's the background, and it's very simple. God is everything. God's laws are there. Could there be, like it says in the Bible, let us, like there's a bunch of intelligent beings out there somewhere, let us create God in our image. Could that be? Why, of course. If time is infinite and eternal, and space infinite and eternal, this process of cyclic process of create and implode, explode, implode, it goes on and on and on. That this is not the human life, intelligent life, is not really strange in eternity, and there may be other intelligent life out there that created a situation with the knowledge of God's laws and ability to move things around, created a situation where the earth would allow evolution to take place. Believe me, you look back, the probability of that happening is very low. So there may have been intelligence in the background of a previous source of intelligence that isn't interfering with our reality, because that would make a mockery. We're developing by God's laws. They just set us apart and created in their image. Maybe that's true, but here we are. And what gives life meaning and purpose is the future. Right there is the key to the most important thing that gives life purpose. We need to survive. That's the most important purpose in life, is a future of life. And we need to develop healthy, intelligent life that can work together to develop the capacity to escape this solar system before it either supernovas or collapses, and get out into the galaxy and be able to go to other galaxies, be able to live in space. That'd be the most important purpose of humankind, to survive. Do we want our life to have any purpose, or just want to enjoy having a party? Don't want to have children? Don't want to build anything? Don't care? Oh. But by their fruits you shall know them. And this overcoming the genetic resentments and learning to live and build a healthy genetics. And actually the prophecy about getting a new body is becoming more and more as we learn God's laws, the laws of physical and behavioral reality. And now they're beginning to make artificial eyes and ears that are giving a sense of vision and hearing to people that can't. Well, to me, that's foolish waste. What we need to do is work on having healthy human beings and prevent genetically defective births of human suffering. Yes, that's not murder to prevent a sickness. It's preventative. As far as caring for some child that's born by accident that is suffering and genetically sick, and to care for them, I have no problem with that. I know many that have adopted autistic children and care for them. They can be very beautiful, and they can be beautiful company too. Just like the need for fellowship is so important. Look how many are getting dogs and cats to fill the loneliness of their homes and the physical structure of our communities. But that's a whole nother thing. So here's this reality. We are evolved out of God's dirt. In God we live and move and have our being. And here comes Jesus saying, I am sent by God. I am part of God to tell you you can have fellowship. And in my Father's house are many mansions, and you can live there too. You don't have to go through the priest. You can talk directly to your source of existence. And they killed him for that. But now, after that, the priesthood reestablished itself, and they have this killing people because they say Jesus is not God. It says there in the Bible, I go to the Father and the Father is greater than I. But you're supposed to believe in this magic or we'll kill you. The Arian Heresy. Many have been killed or their property taken for believing that Jesus, the Son of God, was a human being that spiritually was born of God with a direct relationship and opened the gates of heaven. We don't have to go to a priest. We can go directly to our source of existence. Do we really understand that in all of the scope of eternity? Probably not. It might be very simple that we were just a matter of time and chance, that would have been a source of evolution, but for a planet to exist with the chemical and heat environment like Pangea on Earth and not be struck or destroyed is pretty amazing. It might have been set up for us, but that's a whole nother thing. And there may be, since we know ether is in the background and ether waves, they call them gravity waves now, and they're trying to understand without knowing what they're talking about. But I've shown the how in the ether transmission by collision is practically instantaneous. And the speed of light has to do with leapfrogging vortex rings. I'll stop and I'll show you both of those and then come back. The balls demonstrate the nearly instantaneous transmission of, what do you want to call it, over time, momentum, or over space, energy. They're both conserved, the mass and the capacity for motion. So this is like the ether, boom, 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 very fast. That's a gravitational wave. Now, the next one is the mechanism for photons to travel. Leapfrogging Vortex Rings by Dr. T.T. Lim. I'm Donald Johnson, and when I didn't see Dr. Lim's Leapfrogging Vortex Rings on YouTube, I requested and received permission from him to post them. That's the basic particle of matter, is of vortex rings, and they group together, and vortex rings caught in an envelope of vortex rings, if the internal ring is stationary, you have them just circulating, being a particle of building block for electrons, protons, and neutrons. But if that is broken, that they expand out, like the ring gets stretched out and they're leapfrogging, they travel at the speed of the leapfrogging. That's the speed of light. And yes, they can get a collision and go back into the circular motion. Stationary, the energy goes into rotational rather than the, whether you call it vibrational or whatever, but the wave effect of photons is from this oscillation of leapfrogging vortex rings in an envelope of probably more vortex rings. More needs to be done to investigate the reality of that. But at any rate, we have here the origin of the gravitational wave and the light wave or radio wave. And the point of this background is to say there may be communications we do not understand that have to do with gravity waves. And if there is other intelligence out in the universe, we may be able to communicate with it. And the thought is two things. First, if you were an intelligence in the world and wanted to interfere or wanted to observe the evolution of light, would you like to play games with it and make it a corrupted projection of your own mind game? I think there's no manipulation going on. This the evil outlook, spirit. The spirit is your outlook. And the evil outlook comes from the genetics of the violence in our background. The evil is within us. It's part of God's laws. The strong made the stronger evolutionary process. And in the background side effect of it, with the mammalian, rape was a factor in, and beating up the other boys was a factor in being able to propagate, which made the genetics. That's the way that is. But at any rate, the whole motivation for this was to deal with the topic of the Arian Heresy, which I'd probably be accused of, because the Catholic Church today still says you must believe the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or Jesus is God. Jesus isn't God. Jesus is part of God, and we can join him. He said that. I go to the Father, and we will come and we will live with you. You can live with us. We're part of God. We're made out of his dirt. And to be made out of Christ's Spirit, that Jesus brought this. You're free. You're a sovereign individual with a relationship with your source of existence. Go directly to your source. Don't be dominated by priests or kings or something else. Use your life independently and be responsible for yourself and learn something. And like Jesus said, it's better I go away. I'll send you this outlook of truth, and you will discover all things. And he will send the spirit of truth, the capacity to the outlook to search and discover reality. Our curiosity is wonderful. And we've been discovering God's laws. As I've said before, when my grandmother was born, they didn't have cars and didn't have hardly any paved roads, but and didn't have running water, except you lived downhill from a stream. But the point here is that if we were given the gift of the mammalian nursing bond and a father to teach us to be responsible and hold us responsible for our behavior, that we could direct ourselves intelligently like a group working together, hunting or trapping or something, that we could accomplish something in this life. We're part of an unbroken life. And we're part of God. We're made out of God's dirt. And we can have Christ's outlook. If we were given the love that intuitively we can love, we can logically have Christ's spirit, even if we're not able to feel and bond to our baby. A woman who didn't have that mammalian love has terrible, but it doesn't happen, and they're so stressed. No, maybe it's better they don't have a baby, but they can still logically love and want children to be loved and logically respect life, even though they'd just as soon abort it. And if they have a child and not able to care for it, to find, like my uncle raising mink, if they didn't have a mother that was able to care for them, rescue them and make fur out of that mother, and so let that mother go to work and join the army or something, or do what she wants to do. If she's not able to be a mother, don't have children. If by accident you have, stop, don't do it anymore, and give that one to some woman who was able to give them mammalian nursing care that it needs. So the point to end this is, how do you judge these things? By their fruits you shall know them. Jesus came and said, you're a sovereign individual. Take up your relationship with your source of existence and have fellowship with others that are free from the domination of priests and kings. That was a wonderful example, but we need to have the ability, logically or intuitively or hopefully both, to build a community with this. And how important the physical structure is. I think the Hutterites are miles ahead as far as providing the social interaction needed. We don't have to buy a bunch of puppies and dogs because we're so lonely we're drinking ourselves to death or committing suicide in an apartment, and willing to. There's a graveyard for pets near where I live. People replace emptiness with at least a dog. But here's the important thing. What makes a good home? And of course, to be a good mother, that's something you have to be a given. But it takes a good mother and a good father to make a good home. And how do you know they're a good mother or a good father? By the fruits they bear. So if we should choose our leaders, it must be a couple that has borne good fruit. That is, they have children and grandchildren that are healthy, physically and behaviorally, at least behaviorally. If there's some genetic problems, that's another thing. But here's the point. You have the foundation of Abraham, don't kill the babies, of Moses, you're subject to the law and you're responsible for yourself, and Jesus, which said you are part of your source of existence. You can have a direct relationship and sovereign individual. You're a sovereign individual to work with others and respect others by the law. So here in love, God is love, is taught there. Here's where you come in. Jesus did not give an example of a sovereign individual, female, who became a wife and a mother. Jesus didn't give us that example. And Jesus didn't give us the example of a man who became a responsible and high quality husband and father, so we can build on Christ's outlook and build and give examples of husbands and wives and examples of marriages by their success. It isn't a good man or a good woman, it's a combination working together. And they should be our leaders, and they should be our missionaries. If they've raised their children and they're willing to give up all to go and teach people, God bless them. Go with nothing but the shirt on your back. You'd be surprised what you find. If you go out in the country where people are closer to nature, not a bunch of welfare-raised, fatherless hoods. Okay, it's my hope that this will help you understand where you are, and I pray that we might have fellowship, that we might share our thoughts and the pain, because caring as Christ cared as a mother or a father is a guarantee of pain. Care because you care about the community your children are in, and you'll get hurt there. And you care about the world of work and war that they go into, and you'll hurt there. And then you worry about your grandchildren. But by their fruits you shall know them. Pick your leaders, the man and a woman who have done a good job of raising their children. And of course, managing their own affairs responsibly, and that they have the ability to do that. All right, I'll put the ending message, and that'll be it. Thank you. This is the ending message. This is the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. These are the guest rooms in our 3 homes, New York, Florida, and Russia. They are prepared for those messengers that Jesus prayed for in Luke chapter 10. And he gave them the instructions. Reading from Luke chapter 10, verse 1. After these things the Lord appointed 70 other also, and sent them 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. As Jesus said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with them. Verse 2, therefore he said unto them, the harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest that he would send forth laborers into the harvest. This is Jesus praying for more servants and asking us to do the same. Verse 3, go your ways. Behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. Verse 4, carry neither purse nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man on the way. Verse 5, and into whatsoever house ye enter, first say, peace be to this house. Verse 6, and if the Son of Peace be there, your peace shall rest upon it. If not, it shall return unto you again. Verse 7, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. Verse 8, and into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you, eat such things as they set before you. Verse 9, and heal the sick that are therein, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 10, but into whatsoever city ye enter, and they receive you not, go your way out into the streets of the same, and say, verse 11, even the very dust of your city, which cleaves on us, we wipe off against you. Notwithstanding, be ye sure of this, that the kingdom of God has come nigh unto you. Verse 12, but I say unto you, it shall be more tolerable in that day for Sodom than for that city. In closing, remember Matthew 18, verse 20,
where Jesus said, "For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them."